It's about creating a win-win atmosphere.
The better you are at hosting, the better you also are at selling.
You don't want to turn this into a part-time job where you are spending all your time repeating the same task.
How can you get better at your craft? Because that's really, really important.
Hey, welcome back to Podfathers, and today we're talking about research and planning, formatting your series, your episodes. Might seem a little bit of a boring one in comparison.
Do you think?
I love planning.
You do love planning.
Because we go straight into episodes, everything is planned out, everything's mapped out. But we're going to try and make it good fun for you. And we're going to start this by playing Get to Know Your Father. This is a quick fire round. I'm going to ask you 10 questions, Tolu. You're going to ask me 10 different questions. Just some random stuff on here. Just a bit of light-hearted fun before we get into more serious stuff. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
You've got to answer as quick as you can. You can explain a few of your answers as well if you need to.
Cool.
So, number one, this is a tricky one. What's your favourite animal?
Oh, a liger, because I like lions and tigers.
Never heard that before. Very good. What's your go-to comfort food?
I just love food, to be honest. But if I had to, gun to my head, I would say steak with mac and cheese.
Decent. Are you a coffee or a tea guy?
I hate coffee. Tea, but like a herbal tea because I don't drink caffeine.
What's your favourite movie of all time?
I don't have one because I generally watch movies and then forget about them straight after. So yeah.
I'm similar. If you could travel anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Oh, somewhere with good sun, good water, and great views. So that could be anywhere and pretty easy.
What's your favourite sport to watch or play?
No surprises here. It will be basketball.
Are you any good?
Yeah, I used to be semi-pro.
Amazing. Do you prefer books or movies?
Movies.
What's the best concert you've ever been to?
Similar to the movies, I generally forget them straight after, so I don't know.
What's your favourite season of the year?
Autumn.
Nice. Why?
The colours of autumn. It's still quite nice weather, but then everything starts to change into the colours. The sunsets are nice. Yeah.
I mean, we're in July now and it feels like autumn.
Yeah.
It's
It feels a bit like winter, to be honest.
Every single day. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Oh, night owl to get work done, but for exercise and stuff, preferably in the morning.
Nice. Okay. Well, that's your 10 questions. You got to find out more about your father. Podfather.
Now for you.
Right. Now for me.
What's your favourite way to spend a weekend?
Cheesy answer, with the wife and kids. Just doing fun stuff, either going to the park or bowling or going into London.
What's the weirdest food you've ever tried?
Weirdest food? Fluffy answer. I don't try weird food. I have the same. I've gone to the same Indian restaurant and buy the same thing off the menu. No deviations, because anytime I deviate, it ruins my night because I've had something crap. So
yeah, I was trying to get Deren to try something different at a restaurant we both go to, and it's not happened quite yet.
It hasn't happened yet. No.
If you could have dinner with any famous person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, do you know what? Someone like Lee Evans. The comedian.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of gone off. I think he retired from comedy. I used to love his comedy. I think he's an amazing person as well. So yeah, sort of him around the dinner table would be pretty cool.
Awesome. What's your favourite TV show to binge watch?
I'm going to say Suits was very good.
Love Suits.
However, my editor, who's going to be sitting upstairs, is going to be going, you better say Married at First Sight. I do like a little bit. That's my guilty pleasure. It's Married at First Sight.
That's so funny. My wife's been trying to get me to
not.
watch that. And I'm like, no, there's 30 episodes every season. And I'm quite addictive.
Yeah.
So if I start, I need to finish.
That's my issue.
So can't do Married at First Sight. It's too many episodes.
I can't even blame my wife. She's like,
it's just you.
She'll watch it, but I'm like, yeah, that's just... The thing is, I work very hard during the day.
Yeah.
So in the evening, I don't want to focus. I don't want to work anything out. I just want some crappy TV that I can sit and just go, it's just mindless TV. That's my guilty pleasure.
That's stuff. So my issue is this. I'll be like, I'm not going to watch it. So I'll be washing up or doing something. I can hear it.
Yeah.
And then I get sucked in and I'm like, crap, now I'm in.
You're invested at that
point. I'm invested. Do you have any hidden talents?
Hidden talents? No, everything's on show. No hidden talents.
Okay. What's your favourite holiday and why?
Honeymoon in Hawaii for 3 weeks was incredible.
Wow.
Still to work to this day, 10 and a half years on. Would love to go back. I'm not going to call that a holiday. That was a honeymoon. That's sort of a once in a lifetime trip. That was incredible.
Awesome. What's one thing on your bucket list?
Go back to Hawaii.
Easy.
Yeah.
What's your favourite hobby or pastime?
I love racket sports.
Okay.
So table tennis, squash, badminton I play weekly. Tennis I try and play, but the weather's been crap recently. So yeah, racket sports.
We should play some squash.
Squash?
Squash.
You're going to cover the court with your arms.
Exactly.
So you've got reach.
Yeah, but you might have experience. So I played with my old boss and he was 15 years older than me and he beat me left-handed. because I was going for like physical and he just knew like what
tactical.
To do. Yeah. So I want to learn how to be better at squash.
Right, watch this space. We'll come back with some results and some BTS footage.
Do you prefer the beach or the mountains?
Ooh, I like both. I'm gonna have to say mountains because I burn. So going to a beach is not conducive with my 8th Scottish skin or whatever it is. So yeah, I do like the beach, but I think mountains would be better. Yeah.
Okay. And last one, if you could instantly learn any skill, what would it be?
I would love to learn another language if it's going to be an instant skill. I think that's quite useful.
Which one?
Something like Spanish.
Okay.
I think that'd be pretty cool to know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. That was easy. Let's get into the bulk of this episode then.
To be fair, I don't actually think this is boring. I just think that people are slightly different. So like, this is really interesting for me because I'm not necessarily a heavy planning person. I mostly rely on like curiosity to get good episodes.
Yeah.
But I think that knowing how to plan properly has been a really good learning curve for me, just to be honest with everybody, really good learning curve for me, even with what we're doing. And it's actually quite enjoyable.
I think it's enjoyable because I'm a planner. I like to go into things knowing everything, how it's going to be planned out. And I like my clients to know that. But why I'm saying it's boring is compared to something like monetisation, one of the other episodes, or getting to get guests onto your show, I think a lot of our audience are going to be more interested in that. However, when you actually deep dive into planning, you understand it is very interesting. It is massively beneficial. And it does make the entire podcasting journey so much more seamless. Yeah, it really does.
And I think it's one of the, almost like the fundamentals. So in basketball, we say like there's the fundamentals, which is like dribbling, passing, shooting a little bit. But like everyone wants to dunk and to like, you know, do all the blocks. But you have to have the fundamentals down. And that's what makes like the elite players is people that have the fundamentals. And I think this is one of those things that is the fundamentals. Being able to do this well is really important.
Yeah, and it makes your job of podcasting so much easier when you've mapped everything out. You know what's to come, so you feel more comfortable doing this anyway. Because like we've said before, it can be quite daunting sitting here going, we're going to do a podcast, or it can be for other clients. Whereas actually when you've mapped everything out, you've got your prompt cards with all the details and information on, it's actually fairly straightforward. Yeah, let's get into it. So
where do you start?
Where do I start? I think for me, it's about determining the actual niche of your podcast, who your audience is, what you're going to talk about. So if you run a company, for example, in the wedding space, we've got a wedding podcast here. So they have a bridal boutique. So they have a podcast centered around bringing wedding suppliers onto their show. So it's very relevant, but without being self-indulgent, talking just about their company and how great they are. So I think for me, knowing your audience and knowing how that's going to benefit your company to tap into that audience is the first thing you have to do. Without that, you're just going to create a podcast that's more of a hobby that isn't going to have the benefits from the other side of monetizing it for your company.
Agreed. And I think that what I've found quite interesting with people that have started is sometimes they might start with a specific one in mind. When they start to see who's listening and who's watching, then they're like, oh, okay, I didn't quite get that right. I can tweak it and I can adjust to now, okay, this is the audience that actually really listens and takes action, which is the other part, right? It's not just about, we talk about sanity versus vanity metrics. It's not just about views, it's about views that turn into something. So who are those people that it's converting for and how do you serve them better over time? So I think there's something about, this is who I'm going to start with, but you have to keep your finger on the pulse and understand, was that correct?
But that applies to any business owner because it's about adaptability.
Yes.
You look at what you're doing, what's working, what isn't. You have to test, you have to split test, figure things out, get feedback from people and go, right, we're going to start to deviate because we want this demographic or these are the ones responding most to us. So yes, you plan and you map everything out, but you have to be able to be fluid and work around feedback. So yeah, for me, it's you have to at least start with a demographic in mind, and then you have to be fluid to it. And then the other thing is you have to also understand their preferences. So we've talked before about audio podcast versus video podcast. We are clearly into video podcast because you can cut reels, but even how you determine how you cut those reels, whether people are responding to 10-second reels or 1.5 minute reels. And then you have to base everything you do around that and what's creating the action. And like you say, it's about the call to action at the end. It's no good them watching it going, yeah, this is great, but there's no call to action. So you have to also be fluid with that as well. So
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And then in terms of episode planning, we do it for Podfathers as well. We map out everything. So every episode, we know what the key overarching topic is. We then bullet point our ideas from our experience of what we want to discuss, the key messages that we want to get across. They are very bullet pointed, aren't they? Yeah. We don't go into structuring massive sentences. We're not reading off of loads and loads of cues. It is just bullet points of what we want to cover to make sure that we get the key message across to our audiences. And I think any company starting a podcast should have that as well. So you have your overarching episode, and then underneath that, what bullet points do we need to cover within that episode to get that key message across?
For us, it's all about adding value.
Yeah.
And you have to have a bit of, okay, what is the value that we want to deliver? Yeah. How are we going to deliver that? And that's where, like you said, just the bullet points, just a quick check to say, okay, have I hit the right things and that kind of thing as you go through? Because it's easy once you get in the studio to kind of forget where you're going and just have the chat, but it's really good to have some things to anchor you in as well. Yeah,
and what that means is it also leaves the door open for things like hot topics or current trends.
Yeah.
So if a piece of, I don't know, a podcasting software comes out last week, we can talk about it now. But we've got our bullet points of what we need to make sure that we are adding value to our audiences watching with leaving the door open for new software, new trends, new topics that people are discussing, or also FAQs that you guys are asking us as well. So we get questions submitted to us and we kind of look through and go, okay, we've had three different people ask the same question. We need to make sure we cover that. On that note, if you guys do have any questions, comment, DM us, send us an email so we can try and cover and give you that value as well.
And I think it's just important to remember that, like, the plan is a guide.
Yeah.
It's not like a straitjacket where you have to go through every single thing in the order. Sometimes the order flips around. You know, sometimes the conversation naturally goes into something else. Have that conversation and then find your way back to something else. You know, it's really important that people understand it's just like a guideline, but it's something that gives you that confidence and that security that, okay, I know where I can go.
Yeah, and by knowing that you can be fluid, and we see this loads with the podcasts that come here, you have to be fluid, it has to be conversational. Otherwise, it is literally a case of, right, question 1, this. Thank you. Question 2 is this. And you can't ever have a podcast like that. It does not work. People are watching voyeuristically into our conversation to get value, but at the same time, they want to feel like they are in a pub chat.
Yeah.
And that's what I try and explain to people. Try and make this a pub chat. Have your key bullet points, but the rest of it is, I ask you a question, great, I can then bounce off, we can dispute ideas, and we love disputing ideas.
We do.
So the very first thing when we format a show for a client is we always aim for 12 episodes. And I think we've mentioned this before. We talk about, you can have that as season 1, take a break if you particularly wanted to. You can review season 1, see what the feedback is and what people want, and then come back to season 2 with another 12. And also it makes it very digestible. You can get the 12 key topics, the hot trending topics you want to discuss within your company, within your industry, bullet point those, and then have those as your episodes. And that is literally the most, we start there. That is the fundamental thing you have to start with, is what are the 12 topics we're going to discuss. And then if you end up with 15 or 16, great. But your 12 is the essential. If you've got 3 and then you take a break, you've lost your subscribers. They don't know what they've subscribed to. And then we talk about frequency as well, in terms of how often those 12 episodes are going to be released. So is it every week, every 2? What do you recommend on that? I think we've touched on it before, frequency wise.
I think my ideal frequency would be kind of weekly, but that is based on the fact that you can deliver that. And for some people that might be quite tough. So I would say at least every other week would be good, because then people know, okay, it's every other week, it's coming, it's consistent. I think once a month you sometimes get a little bit lost in everything else because people are so much more distracted. There's so much more content that people have access to. So you kind of need to have that consistency a little bit so that people remember that, okay, it's not this week, but it's next week. But if it's like once a month, it's a bit little for me.
And the problem is people have got nothing to subscribe to at that point. The whole point of getting subscribers is they know that they are getting regular content, not once a month. To me is way too much, not often enough even. So yeah, we always say once a week. However, with companies, every 2 weeks is what we're finding is more realistic.
Yeah.
Because you've got time to plan your episodes, you've got time to come to the studio or do your Riverside or get your guest on, and time to edit and time to deliver.
Yeah. I think it also, I'm testing what happens in between episodes, right? So if you've got 2 weeks, you can do your promo before, some promo after, maybe take some like 5-minute segments from it and really like maximize the fact that it's there. Sometimes a week does feel like a bit like back to back to back to back. And you wonder if the episodes had enough space to breathe. But I'm just really trying to understand people's listening behavior, you know, because I will sometimes listen to 3 episodes in a row just because like I'm in the gym and I can do that. So yeah, I'm really trying to test that actually at the moment.
But like you say, if you're getting the reels out as well, because it's not just about the full episode, if you get your full episode out on Friday, but then you've got 5 reels to release, literally every day you've got content going out, which from a branding perspective is amazing.
Great.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it does also mean you can do every 2 weeks and have 10 reels. So you've always constantly got something coming out.
Exactly.
It's no more difficult work. You've already created the content. You're just chopping up reels and posting on social media. And it's great for the branding. It's great for getting your logo out there, your message out there. So yeah, no, we always say 2 weeks. And the other thing we ask people to do is try and record 3 to 6 episodes first before releasing anything. Because if you're going to produce your episode, release it, you're under a lot of time pressure then. You could be moving house, you could be on holiday, you could be ill for a week, and then you've got that pressure of coming in, otherwise you're going to let your subscribers down. Whereas if you've got 3 or 4 in the bag already, queued up, you're always 3 or 4 weeks ahead or 3 or 4 releases ahead. So I think that's another really good hint for people, unless you're discussing things that are very topical that have to go out at that time. Produce 3 to 5, maybe even 6 episodes and then start releasing, then you're 6 weeks ahead.
I can agree more. Like, I'm a massive fan of batch recording, and so I think when I started, I think I had 8 to 10 already done before I even started releasing, just because I knew that life gets busy. I might not be able to be that consistent, but if I can just get loads recorded, then it's just the tweaks and stuff like that I can do that week if I need to, or I can get 3 or 4 edited and then I'm laughing. So I'm a massive fan of that.
And the thing is, if you're taking the pressure off yourself as well, again, that whole podcasting journey doesn't seem so daunting.
Yeah.
Whereas if you feel like we've got an episode out on Friday, I need to be in the studio, we need to edit, we need to get it out, and you've got life happening, it can end up being, you end up resenting doing things like podcasts. Whereas, batch filming, always recommend it.
And also with guests as well, you don't want to be putting your guests under pressure because you have to release this week. You want to be able to say, look, whenever works for you can work, and then you can figure that out. But you can only do that if you've already got some episodes in the bank, or I call it in the chamber, that you can then release. And then it doesn't matter if a guest has to cancel or whatever it is, like, you've still got content. And
we've seen first-hand experience in the studio of that, where a client is happy to come in, but the guest is ill or something's happened with their child. You have no control over that. And you don't want to put them under pressure going, well, you have to be here because the episode goes out next week. So, always have stuff in the chamber, in the bank. So that leads us on to nicely onto guests, getting guests. I know we discussed it in one episode. We spent an entire episode just talking about how to get guests, how to approach them and the research behind it. But we're going to touch on it now as well.
I think that if you get guest researching right, it has exponential gains for you, because when you can make a guest feel special, understood, like you know them, it makes a massive difference, even just to the connection that you have with them. If you can ask them questions about stuff that's not necessarily something they've told you, like, so I do a lot of business podcasts, so I would look through the LinkedIn, find something that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and I'll ask them about that particular thing. And you can just see that people are like, oh, okay, you've actually looked into me, you kind of know who I am as much as you can, and then you can have that conversation. That's something that I will always try and do, is look through the LinkedIn at least, maybe Google them and see if there's anything interesting that comes up, and then you can have some of those conversations.
But you're quite happy jumping onto a call with someone and just, like I say, using your curiosity to extract the information and make it interesting. You do a great job of that. So for companies, business owners who want to get into podcasting, who aren't that comfortable doing that, what we recommend is you do have the calls, you have the conduct the pre-interviews, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's just a phone call or emails, but just have a pack that you send to them so they know that this is a win-win podcast to be on. You're not there for clickbait. It is, I want to extract information from you about your company, your passion, your expertise, so that you can get that across to my audiences. And then we win in terms of our audiences getting that value as well. So for me, I always say to company owners and people starting podcasts, have those pre-interviews with your potential guests. So they feel comfortable. They feel like they know you before they come into the studio or they jump onto Riverside, and they know that they've got your best interests at heart.
And to be honest, that's something that I'm quite intentional about, even in terms of, as a host, I want to be able to deal with whatever happens. So I want to be able to deal with, well, if someone can't come, then I can get someone else, and I have to just do it. And that's how I want to be good at what I do, if that makes sense. I still offer the pre-calls, right? And that for me is more for the guest to be comfortable, more for them to know the flow and that kind of thing. So I think just being able to do it, that's a personal thing for me, and that's not something I say everybody has to be able to do, but your guest needs sometimes the prep, and that's really important.
But that comes with practice from your side. Because if you're starting a podcast and you're watching Podfathers for advice, you're not going to be at that stage necessarily. 90% of the people aren't going to be at that stage. They want to be making sure they're comfortable, they know everything about their guests, they know the questions they should be asking to extract the right information. And then with time, it becomes more and more fluid. It becomes more and more professional as well, doesn't it? So, and at some point, you'll be like Tolu. Just, with 10 minutes notice, you can jump onto a call and get it done.
When I was at the podcast show, there was a lady, and what's her name? I think it was Kirsty Young, and she's like a world-class interviewer.
Right.
And just hearing how she prepares. So she's got a really nice balance of being really prepared, but also being epic just in the moment. And I was like, I want to be like you when I grow up. She's like my gold standard of interviewing. She's done like so many different interviews with different people. And she even did like Jada Pinkett Smith, which was like very out of her like wheelhouse, but you could see how she approached it. And I was like, yeah, that was very, very cool.
Well, I guess once you've got the skill set and the practice, it's just kind of, you can deviate and interview anyone.
Yes.
The skill set is still the same thing, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's something for people to think about is how can you get better at your craft? Because that's really, really important. Because some of the podcast is going to rely on how good you are at hosting.
Yes.
And that's a really, really important skill. And I think that the better you are at hosting, the better you also are at selling. Right. So when you're then into client conversations, the same skills that you use in podcasting is actually what works really, really well in a sales environment, because you're asking questions, you're being curious, you're really getting to know people, and you're getting that value out of them. So I think that that's something that people actually need to think about is how are you going to become a better host as well?
But also on that, your back catalogue will do the selling for you.
Yeah.
Because those potential guests can watch the previous ones and go, actually, you're a great host. And you are doing it as a win-win to provide value to your audience, and so I want to be on your show.
Yeah.
So it is down to your back catalogue and creating that in the first place for guests to go, yeah, I want to collaborate. So
Absolutely.
It just makes your job a lot easier, doesn't it? So in terms of structuring an episode, do you keep to a structure when you run yours, or is it more a case of you are very fluid?
So it depends on the show format.
Yeah.
Right. So some show formats that I do are like just that career journey flow where we start with a question that's like, who are you as a person or whatever. Then I see how the conversation goes and I flow. And then we end with a question. So in that sense, it is kind of structured.
Yeah.
Some are just like turn up and chat, right? Because they're just conversational podcasts. But it really depends on the format. And I think that's what you really need to figure out is how do you want your episodes to go? Do you want to have, we start with this, we go to this, then we do that? Or do you want to just have a bit more of a free-flowing conversation, but around the value? Like, it really depends on the format.
As Podfathers, for people listening in, so you're a company owner, you want to start a podcast or a marketing manager, I think we would always recommend that you create a format, because again, this comes down to the more you can plan, the more you can structure something, the more comfortable it feels when you're sitting there. So for us, it's always sitting down with a client in the studio and saying, right, let's start with an intro, go into the main content, have a Q&A and have an outro. That's sort of loosely how we try and structure it, as opposed to not understanding where you have to take the direction of the conversation. When you become a great host, you can be a bit more fluid. But I think for me, it's a case of when we format a show, we try and format it in that way. Start with the intro, and then you can also sprinkle things like games. We have Spin the Wheel or Mr. and Mrs., Mr. and Mr., things like that you can throw into that to make it more engaging. But even that, you are watching for feedback from your viewers to see if they enjoy those segments. And then you can start chopping and changing where those segments go within the show.
And I think that when people think about structure and planning, sometimes they think it has to be this like crazily detailed thing. But even what you just said of, okay, intro, Q&A, outro, like that's a plan. That's sometimes as much thinking you might need to do about it to say, okay, this is where I want the conversation to go. It doesn't take hours. No. It can take minutes to create a plan. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand.
It's purely, all of this is a guideline. And you can use that guideline to make yourself feel more comfortable knowing that you've ticked that one off. Right, we're going into main content. That's where your pre-chat, your pre-interview with your guest comes in. Yeah. You know the questions you're going to ask. You've got your prompt cards. You know that you're going to bring in a game at 35, 40 minutes, like Spin the Wheel. And then you're going to end on an outro. And that's the end of it. And then everything else on your prompt card is what you're ticking off as you go along, essentially. For me, I think structuring and creating that guideline is absolutely crucial, because otherwise, if you said to someone, right, sit down and do a podcast, where do you even start? And you don't want this to be a daunting experience either. So, we always create those guidelines for people. That kind of lends itself into the length and the pacing, the duration of every episode. We like to keep it fairly consistent. What would you recommend?
So I think I've seen a very wide range from the people that I've helped to start. So there's one guy, he does like 3 to 5 minute episodes. So he has like a really quick tip that he just delivers every day, but he podcasts every day. So
it has to be 3 to 5 minutes.
It has to be 3 to, yeah. So for his sanity, even to just produce it, so he does like really short, quick hits of tips every day. Right, okay. And that was something I never really thought of until he started doing it, and it actually works really nicely. Yeah. So that's kind of the low end. I've seen half an hour can be quite good for business podcasts. Mm-hmm. When you're telling someone's story, usually like an hour is a bit better. So it really depends on the content of your podcast. So that's kind of, I think that's probably the scale, isn't it? Like quick tips all the way through to like life stories, Stephen Bartlett type
3 hours long,
3 hour podcast. Yeah. And I think for a business, like that's probably way too long.
Yeah.
And especially if your target audience is people who own businesses, like 3 hours is quite tough. I think half an hour to an hour is probably the sweet spot for a business podcast.
And if you're not established like Stephen Bartlett, where you can get world-class people within their industries, where you can I've never listened to a 3 hour podcast.
Really?
Hour and a half.
Okay.
I'll max out at that.
Okay.
So if I see a 3 hour timestamp, not
not a chance.
Not a chance. But yeah, we generally say try and find a duration and try and stick to it for the entire series. So if you're going to say 35 minutes, between 30 and 40-ish minutes is what every single episode should lie at. So you've got that consistency in your entire series. For business podcasts, I'd say 35 to 45 minutes. It allows you enough time to provide value, extract information, get audience feedback, have those segmentations as well. That's generally where it lands. Any less than that, I think you leave the audience kind of going, oh, I kind of wanted a bit more information. And then as soon as you hit the 1 hour timestamp, you've lost people in a lot of cases.
Agreed.
So, yeah, and I think one of the notes I've got here in terms of planning transitions between segments, even that is a very loose guideline. So you know that at 20 minutes you're going to bring in Spin the Wheel. Yeah. Roughly at that time you bring in Spin the Wheel. It's got all the questions on it. You ask your guest to spin it. Something pops up and then you have to answer the question. But treat all of this as a complete loose guideline. But just have a guideline in place. Have a guideline. And in terms of, we've discussed it, but pre-interview communication with guests or potential guests, what do you normally recommend?
So I think having a bit of a template that you can share with people that says, okay, this is what the podcast is. These are roughly the types of questions. Or if you've had a pre-chat with them, then you take the notes of, okay, this is what we talked about. This is what we're going to be doing. Put that into the template. If there's any, like, if you're doing it online, I send like guidelines for, okay, use this browser. This is the kind of lighting. So I give them quite like a step-by-step guide and, okay, this is what's going to happen on the day. So I'm a big fan of having a template for people that I can share with them before. And if you're really smart with it, you can actually automate a lot of those things that happen before. And then you can have like the follow-up email that comes 2 days before and that kind of thing. So I'm definitely a big fan of being able to give people that kind of comfort.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about automations, if you're interested in that, we talk about Zapier and everything else. We have an episode on automations and AI systems, don't we? So you should definitely watch into that. Because again, you don't want that to be a daunting task. No. You don't want to turn this into a part-time job where you are spending all your time repeating the same task. So if you can automate a lot of it, once a guest is booked in, great. They go on automated email, automated follow-up. Zoom calls, anything else? Or do you do any pre-checks on tech? So if it's going to be a Riverside.
So yesterday I was hosting a podcast for a company, and we're talking to data leaders, and sometimes they have really tight security. So usually I do my pre-chat on Riverside because that's where we're going to record. But for some reason the pre-chat was on Google Meet. So Google Meet went fine. We got into the studio yesterday and both of them had the same issue where they were black screen. I couldn't hear them. They couldn't see me. One was on a Windows, one was on a Mac. So it wasn't just like, okay, it's a Mac thing. It was
a security setting.
So now what I've got them to do is all our pre-chats are on Riverside. And if they're not on Riverside, I say, hey, here's a link to Riverside. Jump on for me now. Test it out. Because then we know. Yes. Right? Because we didn't know that before. And now we're in the call. We've like 15 minutes in. No one can hear anybody. We're in the chat. Like it was not good. So yeah, you do have to test some of that before if you can. And that would have just made things way smoother. So we're going to change our process now with how we do that. Yeah,
I mean, we've got tons of case studies the same when we first started. If it's going to be a live stream from the studio to their guest on Riverside or Zoom, they'd always have a phone call going, jump onto Zoom.
Yeah.
However, the recording is going to be on Riverside. So why don't you just do the pre-call on Riverside to make sure technically everything is set up. Your microphone, everything works. There's no compatibility issues.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you end up wasting half an hour, like you say, and then in the end, you're like, let's reschedule to another day.
Yeah. Because our conversation was very much cut short because, you know, they're busy people. So they've got meetings right after. We didn't even have time to go over. So like, yeah, the more you can do that stuff beforehand, your life will be just so much better.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Even to this day, we still have issues because you have the pre-check and then during the actual interview itself, they decide to use a different mic because they've just bought a new mic because they're a bit more invested in it. And it's like, well, that mic isn't now compatible with Riverside or Zoom and you have to mess around and waste time. So yeah, the more pre-checks you can do, the more comfortable your guest feels. It's a little bit easier in a studio environment where you just turn up because then it's the studio's responsibility to have everything set up and just to hit record.
And like computers change, they get updates. So sometimes like that knocks out software. Like there's so many things that could go wrong that you don't even think about.
Last week I had a meeting with a client and Apple's wanted to do their update at that point. So the whole computer just restarted on its own. I've now got Sonoma or whatever it's called. Yeah. But it took about an hour to restart, so I had to reschedule that call. I didn't know that was coming. It's just an automatic update. Just shut the entire thing down. So yeah, with technology, you've got a bit more difficulty. You should invest a bit more time in planning and doing the pre-checks and the technical aspects. And like I say, coming into a studio generally is a bit easier, is a lot easier, let's be honest.
Because it's on them to have everything ready.
Yeah, if you're working with a proper production company, they'll have everything ready. Cameras are set, lights are set. You just literally turn up and have your chat, don't you? So yeah, if you can go down the studio route, and I think we've got an episode purely on studio versus online, haven't we? So and there's drawbacks to both. There's pros to both as well. So prompt cards.
Just like these.
Just like these. How important are they?
I think very important. I think even like, well, it depends on what you're talking about. I think the design is important. So I think it's nice to have something that's branded and that feels nice and looks nice.
Who are those good looking people on our prompt cards?
Mate, I'm so happy that I've got a smile. The first one I looked a bit angry. But yeah, I think designing these really well is really important. And it just also feels professional. So I used to play for a basketball team. I've played for many basketball teams, and this one, their professionalism was so high. When you got there, you've got a bottle with your number on it, you've got like your kit laid out, and you just feel like, okay, I'm coming to work. You know, you feel professional. And that's what I feel like every time I see these, I'm like, cool. And every time I get my head, I'm like, okay, you know? And I think it's so important.
It creates a mindset as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I'm a massive fan of doing things like this, but also the content is really, really helpful. Just to have a glance at, okay, where am I going to go? Start to think about, okay, how do I get there? I think it's really, really helpful to have prompt cards.
Yeah, and you've got your branding front and center throughout an entire episode.
Yeah.
So why would you not have them?
Yeah.
They cost a few pounds to print off from your local printers.
Yeah.
I think initially when I mentioned it to people that, it's not very professional, I've got notes. I'm like, you watch TV shows, you watch Graham Norton, anything else, they have notes. Newsreaders have got notes or teleprompter. So people expect you to have that. And I've interviewed company owners where, you know, they've been CEO for 30 years. As soon as they see the red light on the camera, they're like, there I am. So why don't you have your notes, have your bullet points?
Yeah.
Because again, you want to take away anything that feels daunting with this experience. So you've always got some safety blanket here. It can sometimes go the other way, so we have to train people out of it where they are literally like this the entire time reading off of it. That is not the point of a prompt card. You bullet point a few things on there and that's it. They're not massive long paragraphs to read out. It's just to make sure that whatever key message you're trying to deliver and the value you're trying to deliver in that one episode, you're kind of ticking off as you go along. That is the whole point of these.
Because to be honest, I wasn't very sure about prompt cards at the beginning because you know me, that's not really what I would have normally done. But now I'm like, no, they're
essential, aren't
they? I'm converted.
And even if you don't, I mean, we've got some clients who are amazing. They are great hosts. They literally have completely empty prompt cards. So they'll just have that. But they have it for the branding. Yeah. Because why would you not?
Why would you not?
So yeah, prompt cards are essential. We always say, again, from experience, because we've had people print A5 and they've had them printed in gloss. Okay. How are you going to write on gloss? Yeah. It smudges. Yeah. So go to your local printer or go online. I mean, we've got starter packs where we tell you where to buy it, what the costs are. Completely third party. We're not affiliated with them. Always go A5. A6 is too small. Okay. Again, from branding, you're not going to see the logo. And plus, you've got to write really small on there. Yeah. A5 matte printed is always the best. If you want to laminate the front where the logo is, that's fine, but the other side has to be matte so you can actually write on it and it doesn't smudge. And they're not expensive at all. You can get a pack of 500 of these that are going to last you for about 100 episodes, a long time, for about £40. So it's worth having. And then the other thing we always recommend in our starter packs is, depending on the format, whether it's a studio shoot or Riverside, have some kind of branding in the back. Because again, we've got our A2 poster. It's front and center. It's very visual. Doesn't cost a huge amount of money. You can go as far as having printed mugs. I mean, we don't sit here having tea and coffee, but we have got people who, they've got the coffee, they've got the branding on it as well. So
it's the little details that make a massive difference.
Yeah, and even just having the matching hoodies. It's just it's a small detail. It's very subtle, I think.
I don't think
it's not that subtle.
Orange is never subtle.
It's not that subtle. It's kind of uniform. It's consistency as well, and that's what people like.
Yeah. It shows you've invested as well.
Rather than just turned up to shoot.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, so prompt cards are essential. And we've touched on it before in terms of the tone of the conversations you have with any guests. Yeah. It should be conversational, and I always relay back to it should feel like a pub chat. It doesn't have to be pub chat content.
No.
But it has to feel like a conversation, because if it's too formal, if it's too much like an interrogation, people switch off. They're not going to be watching that.
Some of probably the most touching feedback I've received is that like it feels a bit like a therapy session. Yeah. Like they can just come in, have a good chat, feel heard.
Yeah.
And that wasn't what I was thinking about, but it's like it's been consistent feedback. It's like it feels like therapy, and I'm like, that's really nice actually, that people can come and feel safe and that they can share. So that's probably what I think about is, okay, how do I get people to feel comfortable? How do I get them to share things and just really like be open? Because that's a great conversation.
Because why would they not want to? They've spent their time coming to a podcast. They want to share information. So
Exactly.
if you've done your research on the types of questions to ask them in a very approachable conversational way, keeping that tone light, they're going to feel appreciated. They want to tell their story.
Yeah.
Whereas if it feels like an interrogation and you're constantly looking at your prompt cards, okay, thank you. Next question, this. They don't feel like they've been heard.
So we got on here about active listening, and I think that is one of the biggest keys, because
in life.
Yeah, like honestly, like if you can hear what people are saying, ask questions based on what they've said, like it shows that you're listening and you want to understand more. And that's where like the conversation flow comes as well from, is that you can actually go through that and really say, okay, you mentioned this, like, what do you mean by that? And how did you feel when this happened? And then you get into other things that I would have probably never had on my sheet. Because I don't know you're going to say that. So until I've heard that, I can't respond. So that flow of conversation is really, really important, not just being like, next question.
And that's how you can differentiate the very best podcast, because it doesn't have to be the most glamorous studio that you're filming in with the best lighting, everything else. If that conversation flows, you're extracting that value.
Yeah.
That's what people are listening. Everything else is a bonus.
100%.
If you're not established, it's great to be in a studio where you've got the lighting, the sound, the cameras, everything done for you. You've got your branding sorted. And those touches do make a huge difference. But it's no good if you can't ask the right questions and if you can't have a conversation to extract that value. So I think that, again, leads back to practicing as a host, being prepped and planned as a host as well, to make sure you're asking the right questions. And you've done your research as well.
Agreed.
And engagement techniques. So I've got on here, can you share your own relevant experiences or thoughts to create two-way dialogue?
Ooh.
I'm going to bring that over to you.
My approach to this is, I think it depends on what kind of podcast it is, right? So this is two of us going back and forth having a conversation. Yeah. Neither of us is really the guest, right? We're both hosts.
Co-hosts.
So in this thing, we're co-hosting. So it's probably going to be 50-50, 60-40 kind of vibe. When I've got a guest, I'm trying to think of 90-10 in the guest favor, or 80-20, depends on the type of podcast.
Yeah.
So while I agree, create a two-way dialogue, absolutely, but not by going off on like a massive tangent and then you're now the star of the show. When you have a guest, the guest is the star of the show. They should get the lion's share.
And they should feel like the star of the show.
Exactly. And they don't feel like that if you're doing all the talking.
Yes.
So when I first started hosting, some of the feedback I got was like, you just ask questions and shut up. And it's really nice. Like, you just let me talk as a guest. And I'm like, isn't that what everybody does? But actually,
you should tell Piers Morgan that, shouldn't you? He asks a question, then answers himself.
He's the star of the show, though. That's the thing. It is the Piers Morgan show. He's the star.
Yes,
true. And he's really just there to like make you look stupid.
Well, it's clickbait, isn't it?
So we don't want to do that.
Please don't do that. It's annoying. We don't need another Piers Morgan, do we?
No. So that's how I think about it, is give enough that there is a bit of a bounce and a bit of a connection, but not so much that you're starting to dominate the conversation, because really you're there to host. You're there to make sure they have a great time, that their story is heard. People aren't tuning in to listen to you as the host, Yeah,
I think even that comes down to planning and telling them that as well, because it also depends on your guests. We've had guests on where they are sort of one-word answers, or potentially
Really?
they could be one-word
Okay.
answers. So we guide them in the direction of, look, we want to extract that value
Yes.
from you. Tell us a bit more, go into
Yes.
a bit more in depth. And if they know they are going to be the star of the show, they know to prep for that.
yeah.
And they can think of case studies, examples, anything else they can bring to the table, which makes your life as a host a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because not everyone's extroverted. Not everyone can
no.
come up with examples off the top of their head.
Yeah.
So they do want to know that they're allowed to do that.
We have all had those one-word answer people, and it is tough.
They never get invited back.
And their episode gets very interestingly edited, I think. So I think it's an interesting one. We've got the verbal and non-verbal cues.
Yeah.
I think that this is a really tough balance as well with podcasts, because when you hear too much like, it's like, stop. I just want to hear. And that's something that I'm really working on actually, is how do I give cues for people to continue and smile and stuff like that without being too much on the verbal side. Because it can be really hard sometimes when the host is like too like, I've heard it on my stuff and I'm like, oh, shut up. So that one's a really interesting balance. But again, it depends on the type of conversation you're having.
Yeah, and I suppose, again, the non-verbal stuff, sort of the smiling, because I'm using this as an example, and I know they're going to be watching this podcast. We had a client as a host who literally sat here like this. They'd ask their questions and just sit here, and then you'd be answering. They're just staring at them. I'm like, please don't do that. Please never do that. So again, we've trained him up in terms of hosting techniques. So you can just be here and just kind of smile and nod along, but you don't have to either stare them out or, okay, tell me more. It's like, dude, come on, give it a rest. It's too much.
That's too
so
much.
it's finding that fine balance, but that comes with practice as well, doesn't it? So you may not be perfect at it when you first start, but use that as a practice bed in terms of perfecting your craft. And you should be improving. Even if after 40 episodes, you should constantly be looking at how you can improve and listen to audience feedback as to you're talking too much or you're talking too little. So, yeah. And I think, the nodding and smiling is also crucial.
Yeah, because that's what you would do if you were talking to someone in real life.
Hopefully. Again, we touch on it on plenty of times, but it's about creating a win-win atmosphere for everyone.
Yes.
It is for you as a host, it is your show, but it needs to feel win-win for your guests as well.
Yeah.
So they need to feel like they've been heard, they've got across their key messages, they've showcased their expertise, their business potentially, if it's a business podcast. And how else do you do that? And how else do you piggyback off of that win-win success?
For me personally, like a business podcast is really about the relationships that you build. So firstly, with your guests, like that's probably the most important relationship that you're going to build on a business podcast. And then also with your audience. So like if I'm just making personal content as like a personal thing, like my audience is probably by far the most important relationship I'm going to build.
Yeah.
I feel like when you're doing a business podcast, the first and most important relationship is actually with your guests. And then with your audience, because your guests might actually connect you with people and do different things, even if you've got no views.
And you talk about this before in terms of relying on referrals.
Yes.
So you've had a guest on, they've had a great time,
Yes.
they feel heard, they've got their message across, and they've maybe won some business off the back of being on your podcast.
Yeah.
If you ask them for a favour, like, do you have any referrals that would love to come on the podcast? You've got a catalogue of people queuing up to be on your podcast, knowing that this guy or this girl has had a great experience with you.
Exactly.
And also you can win business off of it as well. I think I used the case study we had before where they couldn't get in with a certain company.
Yes.
So she went, I'll tell you what, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to invite the leader into podcast, get straight past the gatekeeper. He came on, 45-minute podcast, built a rapport and relationship with the leader of that company. And suddenly they're selling to them at the end of the podcast.
Yeah. And that's why for me, the guest for a business podcast is the most important. Then like how you connect with your audience, build your relationship. So what kind of value are you giving? Are you giving practical advice for people and practical things? Like that value side of things for the audience as well is really, really important. But with the guests, it's about creating that good relationship. It's about them having a great time, them feeling like it was professional and organized, because that's how your business is going to come across to them.
I think it should just be win-win for everyone. And also, I'm going to caveat the case study I said earlier, is you should never invite a guest on with the pure intention of trying to sell them, because it's going to come across like you're trying to sell them.
Yeah.
You should bring them on to build rapport, build a relationship, build another new connection. And then if something comes off the back of it, great. But it's a great way of bypassing a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Inviting a leader on, connect with them on LinkedIn. I think you give practical advice on how to do that as well in one of the other episodes. Invite them in, provide that value to them, provide the value to your audiences, and build that win-win relationship. Okay, so we're using the podcast to create that win-win relationship with our guests, with our audiences. We give them value for them to actually subscribe. Anything else that you want to be adding on in terms of this particular episode? Anything else that springs to mind? I think we've covered a lot here.
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a lot. And if I was just to summarize, I don't think I have anything else to add.
Yeah.
But it's that planning is good. Researching is good. And I think it just gives you that loose structure that you can follow. And it really depends on your personality. Like, how much planning do you need to do?
Yeah.
Like, some people can actually plan things to a really good amount of detail, but still make it feel natural. Mm-hmm. And if you can do that, then do that. So like, what makes you feel comfortable? But I think that even if you just spend 15, 20 minutes before an episode actually planning it out, that's really good for you. I think when you have guests, having that pre-call is a really, really good option. It makes you feel comfortable, makes them feel comfortable, and it also gives you more touch points with them as well. So that's always going to be good for relationship building. So I think that everybody should be thinking about, what does planning look like for me? And what does research look like for me? How am I going to make that the best thing for me? Yeah,
and also if you're treating, I'll go back to what we said about creating the 12 episodes, the structure for those. You're essentially creating a story arc, same as you would with any kind of storytelling, going, this is the beginning, this is the end, these are the topics we're going to cover in the middle. You would do that generally anyway, writing a story, creating a movie, anything else. Treat your podcast in exactly the same way, because what you're then doing is keeping everyone engaged, and there seems to be a format for them to follow. Because otherwise, if we came here and just waffled on for 45 minutes every episode, we don't really know what we've covered, what value we've gotten. You can't digest the information properly that we've given you either. Whereas the way we're trying to do it is create separate episodes. Every episode hits on one particular facet. We obviously deviate slightly, but that's crucial for us. But you should also treat your podcast in that same way as well. So I think we've covered everything for this episode. Obviously, we'll be back with more information, more episodes. In the meantime, what else do we need our audience to do?
Like and subscribe and follow.
Comment and email and all that good stuff. So yeah, any questions you've got, fire them across to us. We'll try and answer them in future episodes. And we've got free resources on our website. Download all the information there. We've got starter packs on there, free guidance. So head over to the link in the description as well. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.